A week passed. The snow began to melt, slowly retreating under the early warmth of spring. Birds returned to the trees, and the sound of rushing water grew louder from the swollen riverbanks. Life on the farm carried on, but not for Eli. Could feel it in his chest, in his bones. He wasn't the same. He still helped his mother feed the chickens and gathered firewood as his father returned from town with news and supplies. But he moved differently now, quieter, more watchful. Something had shifted. It wasn't just the silence Naya left behind, it was the weight of what he'd seen. The warriors, the lines drawn and erased in the snow, the red feathers still hung above. The barn door, fluttering in the breeze like a flame, refusing to go out. Folks in town whispered about what had happened on the ridge, but no one knew the whole story. The sheriff never spoke of it again. And those who did, only said one thing. 700 warriors stood and left without drawing a weapon. That boy must have done something powerful. Eli didn't offer answers. He just listened. But the questions wouldn't stop inside him. One morning, his father set a hand on his shoulder while they worked in the field. "You've been different," he said. Eli looked up. How quieter but stronger. He paused. "People in town are scared, Eli. They don't understand what happened, and folks don't like what they don't understand." Eli wiped sweat from his brow. "Then they can stay scared. I did what I had to." His father didn't argue, just nodded. "I know, and I'm proud." That evening, Eli returned to the barn. He took the carved hawk pendant Naya had given him from its hiding spot and held it in his palm. He could still hear her voice when she said the words, "Now, I keep you safe." He looked out past the fence line, toward the trees and the long stretch of hills beyond the river. Somewhere out there, Naya rode with her people, alive, strong, respected, and he was still here, just a farm boy in Montana, or maybe something more. That night, while the moon cast pale silver over the land, Eli packed a small satchel, flint, jerky, a canteen, and a rolled blanket. He slid the pendant around his neck and stared at himself in the cracked barn mirror. He didn't look like a boy anymore. At dawn, his mother found him saddling one of the horses. She didn't ask where he was going. She only stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around her shawl, eyes shining. "You'll come back?" she asked. Eli paused. "I don't know. You're still my boy." He smiled faintly. "Always." She stepped forward and placed something in his hand, a folded piece of cloth. The blanket, the one he'd given Naja. "I found it by your bed. Thought you might still need it." He looked down at the wool, worn and patched, and realized it had come full circle. He rode out just after sunrise. The wind was calm. The trail ahead was open. He didn't know where it led, but he didn't need to. The path had already been set, not by blood, or name, or tribe, but by choice. A choice to be something better. A choice to live by honor. A choice to protect the kind of world where enemies could become brothers. And where a single act of kindness could echo louder than gunfire. As the farm disappeared behind him and the wide valley opened before his horse, Eli Parker rode toward the horizon, not as a boy running from his past, but as a young man riding into his legacy. Years passed. The valley changed, as all things do. The railroad came, carving its way through forests and hills, bringing more settlers, more noise, and more strangers to the land. Bridger's Hollow grew shops, saloons, a schoolhouse, even a jail with iron bars and brick walls. But the barn on the Parker land still stood, weather-worn, quiet, still guarded by the red feather above its door, faded now, but never taken down. People often asked about it. Some said it was a warning, others said it was a blessing. But the old folks remembered, and the story never died. They told of a winter long ago, when a young white boy found a dying native girl near the river, and instead of turning her in, or walking away, he gave her his blanket and carried her to safety. They told how, days later, 700 warriors came down from the hills and lined up outside his barn, not to fight, but to watch, to protect. They said, not a shot was fired, not a word spoken in anger, because of one boy's kindness, and how that boy rode away, not as a child, but as a man with a hawk pendant on his neck and a piece between two peoples resting on his shoulders. Years turned to decades. Children grew up hearing the tale. Some thought it myth. Others believed every word. And far beyond the valley, among the Crow people, the legend grew too. They called him Brother of the Blanket. In their stories, he was the boy who faced guns with kindness, who stood between hate and hope, who changed the course of fate not with bullets, but with honor. And in the quiet parts of winter, when the wind whistled low and snow fell in soft drifts across the plains, the elders would tell the children, "Once, there was a girl who nearly died, but the world changed because a stranger shared his warmth. He gave her more than a blanket. He gave her back to her people." Eli Parker was never seen in Bridger's Hollow again. Some said he went to live among the tribes, learning their ways, carrying messages between nations. Others believed he crossed the Rockies and became a scout, riding under no flag but his own. No one knew for sure, but every few years, someone would find a feather tied to their gatepost or a hawk pendant left in a tree, and they'd remember. One winter, Long after the war, drums had gone silent. A weathered rider appeared on the ridge. He was older now, hair streaked with gray, a scar on his cheek, a calmness in his eyes. He dismounted, walked to the barn, and looked up at the feather, still hanging, still dancing in the wind. Then he smiled. He hung a second feather beside it, one red, one white, and then he rode on, into the snow. So the legend lives on, not in books, not in monuments, but in the hearts of those who still believe that peace can come from courage, and that sometimes, the greatest warrior, is the one who chooses not to fight. The drums grew louder as the moon climbed higher, steady, deep, ancient. Each beat echoed through the valley like a heartbeat from the earth itself. Eli stood frozen in the doorway of the barn, rifle forgotten in his hands, eyes locked on the dark horizon beyond the tree line. "What is that?" he whispered. Naya didn't answer. She just stood beside him, still wrapped in the blanket he gave her days before, watching the ridgeline with the calm of someone who already knew what was coming. Then came the horses. First, a flicker of movement along the ridge, then a shape, then 10. Then hundreds. One by one, like ghosts emerging from the trees, they appeared. Warriors on horseback, faces painted in war symbols, feathers tied to their braids, furs draped over their shoulders. Some held spears, others long rifles. Many held nothing at all, only silence. They didn't charge, they didn't shout. They lined up, row by row, across the ridge above the Parker farm, a wall of solemn strength, mounted on the breath of night. Eli couldn't count them all, but his breath caught as the line kept going. 203, 5, and then 700. The sound of hooves thundered on the dirt trail behind them. Eli spun around just as Sheriff Coates and his riders came up the hill, lanterns swinging from their saddles, pistols at their sides. "Boy," Coates barked, "step aside." They pulled up near the barn, the sheriff and 3 men town deputies and a local rancher, eyes narrowed, jaws tight. They didn't look like they were here to talk. "You've got someone in there," Coates growled. "Girl injured." "One." "Of the Crow. From what we've heard. You didn't tell us." Eli stood his ground. "She was dying. I saved her." "That's not your decision to make, son," the sheriff snapped. "That girl's part of a raiding party. Folks down south got burned out. We're under orders to report every Indian found off reservation." Eli's hands clenched at his sides. "She's not part of anything. She was running from soldiers. Someone hurt her." "She hasn't hurt anyone." The sheriff's eyes flicked past Eli toward the barn, then toward the hills, and froze. The riders saw them too. One by one, their heads turned. Their voices fell silent. 700 mounted warriors. Silent, motionless, watching. One man dropped his lantern. "Dear God," someone muttered. From the ridge, a single rider began to descend. Slowly, the warrior rode down the hill toward the barn, stopping at the edge of the field. His horse was painted with white handprints and black stripes. His headdress flowed behind him like river grass. His face, marked with red and black, carried the weight of a man who had seen wars and ended them. Naya stepped forward. Eli looked at her. "Who is that?" she whispered. "My father." The sheriff reached for his pistol. Eli stepped between him and Naya. Don't understand what's happening here, son?" "No," Eli cut in. "You don't." The chief dismounted slowly. He approached with empty hands, his eyes locked on Eli, not hostile, not fearful, just curious. He came to a stop 10 paces away. Then he spoke, deep and measured. Naya responded, her voice soft but strong. They spoke back and forth, Eli not understanding a word, but the tone told the story. Relief, pride, trust. Then the chief stepped forward and placed his hand on Eli's shoulder. He looked the boy in the eye, and then, softly, reverently he reached down, pulled a knife from his belt, and cut a strip from his own cloak, tying it to Eli's wrist. The gesture needed no translation. Honor, respect, brotherhood. The sheriff and his men remained quiet. For the first time in their lives, they knew what it meant to be outnumbered, not in weapons, but in truth. Eli turned to them. "She's leaving," he said. "With her people, this is over." No one argued, no one moved. Minutes later, the chief turned back to his horse, and the line of warriors began to shift like a tide. One by one, they disappeared over the ridge, the same way they had come, silent, proud, and powerful. Eli watched until the last figure vanished into the dark, the sound of drums fading behind them. The war had never come, because a boy gave a blanket, and a people gave him peace. The next morning dawned with a quiet Eli had never known. No drums. No hoofbeats. Just birdsong and the creak of frostmelt dripping from the barn roof. The snow on the ridge was untouched again, as if 700 warriors had never stood there, as if the earth itself had covered their tracks out of respect. Inside the barn, the fire had gone cold. But Eli didn't feel alone. He sat on the barn floor, elbows on his knees, staring at the folded blanket that Naya had left behind, the same one he'd wrapped around her. when she was freezing in the snow. She had taken nothing with her, not the food, not the water, just her strength. And her silence. He didn't notice the horse until it was already near the gate. An elder rode alone, wrapped in fur, hair silver, and long, braided down his back. Not the chief from last night, older, slower, but his eyes carried a storm behind them. Eli stepped outside slowly. The man dismounted with effort, walking toward Eli with the kind of weight in his steps that only comes from carrying decades of pain. He didn't speak at first, just stood in the pale light of morning, taking the boy in with quiet reverence. Then, in careful English, he said, "You gave your blanket to the daughter of a nation." Eli blinked. "I didn't know who she was." The old man nodded. "That is why." It meant more. He introduced himself as Red Tree, the tribe's elder historian, keeper of memory and name. "Naya," he said, "is firstborn to the chief, a spirit child, chosen before birth by the dreamers. She was not just a daughter, she was a bridge." Eli frowned. "A bridge, yes, between your people and ours." Red Tree knelt slowly by the fire pit, scooping a handful of ash into his hand. He let it fall between his fingers. "There was a time, long ago, when white and red sat together, shared food, shared stories. Your people forgot. We did not." He looked at Eli. "But last night, they remembered." Red Tree told him more. About how Naja had been traveling with a peace envoy, a small group sent to parley with a nearby tribe. On their return, they were ambushed. Not by warriors, not by outlaws, by cavalry. Only Naja escaped, wounded, wandering through freezing woods for days, barely surviving, until Eli found her. "If she had died on your land," Red Tree said, "there would be blood. We were ready, 700 ready." Eli's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to start anything. I just couldn't leave her there." The old man gave a faint smile. "That is why you changed everything." Before he left, Red Tree pulled something from the leather pouch at his side, a small carved pendant, shaped like a hawk in flight. He placed it in Eli's hand. This was her brother's, a warrior who fell last winter. She carried it when she ran. "Now, she says it belongs to you." Eli stared at the pendant. It was smooth, warm from the man's palm, carved with perfect lines. "Why would she give me this?" Red Tree stood, steadying himself on his cane. "Because in our way, you are now her blood, her brother, her kin, and because one day," he looked off toward the ridge, "you may need each other again." As the old man rode away, Eli stood there in the snow, the hawk pendant clenched in one hand, the blanket folded at his feet. He understood now. He hadn't just saved a life, he'd protected a future. That night, he added one final thing to the barn. Above the door, nailed into the beam, he hung the red feather, the same one that had once marked danger. Now, it meant something else. Honor, memory. In peace. The next morning came like a whisper, quiet and still, with the gray sky hanging low over the valley. Eli barely slept. He'd stayed in the barn loft most of the night, cradling his father's rifle, eyes darting from the tree line to the hills beyond the river. Nothing moved, but the feather on the corral fence remained a silent warning, or maybe a marker. He didn't know which was worse. Down below, Naya slept soundly, her breathing no longer shallow. Her face had gained a bit of color, and the fever seemed to have eased. Eli brought her warm water again and fed her small spoonfuls of porridge he cooked over the stove. She was still weak, but her eyes followed him more closely now. He noticed her flinch when she heard boots on wood. Even when he spoke softly, she tensed, always watching, always ready to run. She'd seen something bad, but she hadn't said a word more. By noon, Eli decided to step out briefly. He left the rifle by the barn door and walked down to the corral. He plucked the red feather from the fence, turning it slowly in his fingers. It was painted war paint. His heart thumped. He'd seen drawings of feathers like this in town, on posters and newspaper clippings warning settlers about Indian raids, most of it exaggerated, his father claimed, but the symbol was real. That meant someone from her tribe had been here, or worse, someone hunting her. He searched the snow for tracks. There were a few faint hoofprints heading into the tree line, but the wind had already begun to erase them. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be seen. Eli turned back toward the barn. That's when he saw it. Just beyond the ridge, far off across the frozen river, stood a lone rider. Still, watching, he couldn't make out the face not from that distance, but he saw the outline of a long spear, feathers fluttering from its tip. The rider didn't move, just sat there, on a painted horse, like a statue carved from the hills. Eli's mouth went dry. He blinked, and when he looked again, the rider was gone. Back inside, Eli found Naya awake, staring at the closed barn door. Her eyes were wide. "You saw him too, didn't you?" he asked. She didn't answer, but the fear on her face said enough. Eli crouched beside her. "Was that your people? Your tribe?" Slowly, she shook her head. "Are they looking for you?" She hesitated. Then she whispered a word. "Blue coats." Eli felt a chill run through him. Bluecoats-soldiers. She had been running from them. That much was clear now. Maybe they'd attacked her people. Maybe she escaped. But if soldiers were after her, things were worse than he'd thought. And if native warriors were watching from the ridge too, he was caught right in the middle. Later, that night, while checking on the chickens behind the barn, Eli found something else, a stone arrowhead, freshly planted in the snow beside the coop. It hadn't been there earlier. No footprints, no sound, just the arrowhead. He picked it up, heart pounding, and turned toward the trees. Again, no one, just shadows in the snow and wind in the branches. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, strange signs began appearing everywhere. A small totem of sticks and feathers hung from the barn's rear beam. Fresh deer meat was left by the fence, wrapped in birch bark. The horses, usually calm, paced nervously in their stalls. Whoever was out there, they were close, and they knew he was protecting Naya. But were they watching over her, or warning him? Inside the barn, Naya finally spoke again, this time with more strength. "You. Help me," she said slowly, carefully choosing the words. "You not like others?" Eli nodded. "I'm not." She paused, then added, "They come soon." Who? Eli asked. She looked toward the hills with haunted eyes. "My father, my people, they looked for me." Eli swallowed hard. "How many?" She held up her hand, then spread her fingers wide. "Not 5, not 10, hundreds, asterisk." The town of Bridger's Hollow sat like a scar on the open plains, all dust, clapboard buildings, and suspicion. Folks here didn't take kindly to surprises, especially the kind that rode in from the wilderness or wore feathers in their hair. Eli knew that all too well. That's why he kept quiet about Naya. But secrets, like smoke, have a way of leaking through the cracks. It started with Sheriff Coates, a weathered man with a jaw like granite and a mustache stained from pipe tobacco. Coates wasn't one for unnecessary questions unless something smelled off. And Eli showing up at the general store alone for the second time in a week, buying bandages, canned milk, and extra kerosene, made the sheriff sniff the air. "You patching up horses, or people?" Coates asked, leaning against the store counter, eyes narrow. Eli kept his tone steady. "Just Mama. She's been sick again." "Humph," the sheriff grunted. "Funny thing, Trapper Boy passed your land day before yesterday. Said he saw boot prints near the river. Smaller than a man's, too small to be yours or your PO's." Eli didn't answer. Quits leaned closer. "We got rumors, son. Heard tell some of the Crow broke off from the reservation last week. Word is they were chased west toward this valley. You seen anything, unusual?" Eli shook his head, forcing a shrug. "No, sir." The sheriff gave him a long, hard look. "You see something, you say something. This ain't the kind of thing you want to keep quiet about. That's how folk get hurt." Eli nodded, gathered his supplies, and left the store with a pit growing in his stomach. Back at the barn, Naya was sitting up for the first time, weak but alert. She stared at the fire as he handed her warm food. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, softly, she said, "They know." Eli turned to her. "Who knows?" She looked at him with steady eyes. "The white men, soldiers, and the ones in town. They know I am here." He didn't ask how. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe she saw the same shadows Eli did. "Then we have to move you," he said. "Hide you better." But Naya shook her head. Too late, not just them coming. Her eyes flicked toward the window, past the barn walls and the hills beyond. Her voice was barely a whisper. "My people, they are close." That night, the farm was different. Quiet, in the wrong way. Eli stood at the edge of the pasture with his puss rifle slung across his back, watching the tree line. No wind, no owls. Just stillness, like the whole land was holding its breath. That's when he saw it, a flicker of torchlight in the distance. Not in the trees, in the town. And then came the sound. Hooves on dirt, fast, urgent. A rider galloped up the trail toward the Parker farm. Eli stepped forward, rifle raised. "Whoa, whoa," came the shout. "It's me." It was Tom Hargrove, Eli's neighbor, red-faced, breathless. "They're coming, Eli," he said, reining in his horse. The sheriff, 3 others. Armed. Eli's mouth went dry. "How do you know?" "Heard em talkin' at the saloon. Said your barn might be hiding one of em Crow girls. Said if it's true, they'll take her in or take her out." Didn't sound like they cared which. Eli looked toward the barn, the firelight flickering through the slats. "I gotta warn her," he muttered, and turned to run. Tom grabbed his arm. "You don't get it, boy. They're not coming to talk. They're coming to make sure." Inside the barn, Naya was already standing, clutching the blanket around her. "They come," she said calmly. Eli nodded. "We have to run." But Naya shook her head. "No, I stay. If I run, they follow." She paused, then looked up at him. "You saved me now. I keep you safe." Eli's hand shook. "There's 5 men coming, Naya with guns. You can't stay here." But she stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. "They not alone." He blinked. "What do you mean?" And then, from somewhere in the night, came the sound of drums. Soft, distant, a rhythm rising from the woods, a sound no settler had heard in years. The wind howled across the Montana plains like a ghost looking for a home. It was the kind of cold that got into your bones, the kind that turned breath into fog and made the trees groan under the weight of frost. The sun was just climbing over the snow-covered hills, casting long golden rays through the cottonwoods along the river. 13-year-old Eli Parker trudged through the thin blanket of snow, his boots crunching on frozen earth. He wore an oversized flannel shirt and corduroy pants, held up by suspenders, and a thick wool blanket draped over his shoulders. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his breath came out in quick puffs. His father had gone into Bridger's Hollow 2 days ago to sell pelts and pick up supplies. His mother was sick in bed again, coughing through the nights. That left Eli to tend the farm and check on the cattle, scattered somewhere near the riverbank. As he reached the creek, the familiar sound of the current gurgling beneath sheets of thin ice filled the air. The water hadn't frozen fully, yet enough to make crossing risky, but that's when he saw it, a shape still, motionless, half covered in snow near a cluster of reeds along the bank. Eli froze, his heart thudding in his chest. At first, he thought it might be an animal, a deer, maybe, but as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a girl, a native girl, maybe his age, maybe a little older. She lay on her side, her long black hair tangled and matted with ice, her dress made of deerskin and beads, torn and stained. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, barely alive. Eli dropped to his knees beside her. Hey, hey, can you hear me? He asked, his voice cracking with fear and confusion. She didn't respond, only let out a faint wheeze. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue. She'd been out here all night, maybe longer. Eli knew what happened to people who slept in this kind of cold. They didn't wake up. Without a second thought, he pulled the blanket from his shoulders and wrapped it tightly around her. He pressed it against her sides, tucking it beneath her legs, trying to give her every bit of warmth he could. I've got you, he whispered, voice trembling. You're gonna be okay. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, for just a moment, deep brown, full of fear, and something else. Relief. Eli looked around. No tracks but his own. No horses, no one in sight. He knew what folks in town would say if they saw her hand Indian girl on white man's land, near a homestead. Trouble, that's what they'd call it. Not a child, not a victim, just trouble. But Eli didn't care. He bent down, slid his arms under her small frame, and lifted her from the ground. She was lighter than a sack of grain, bones and frost. He could feel the trembling of her body against his chest. With every step back toward the barn, the cold bit harder, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The barn creaked as Eli pushed the door open with his shoulder. Inside, the smell of hay, leather, and old wood welcomed him. He laid her gently on a pile of burlap sacks and straw, still wrapped in his blanket. Then he lit the oil lantern and placed it beside her, casting a soft golden glow over the rough wood and her shivering frame. He grabbed an old quilt from the corner and wrapped it around her too. Then, he built a small fire in the metal drum stove near the stalls, feeding it dry wood until the barn began to warm. She hadn't spoken, not yet, but she was breathing more deeply now. Eli sat beside her, unsure of what to do next. Who was she? What happened to her? Why was she alone? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. He had saved her life, and from this moment forward, nothing in his world would be the same. The wind had settled by the time night fell. Inside the Parker family barn, the fire crackled in the rusted iron stove, its flickering light casting shadows across the wooden walls. Eli sat on a stool nearby, elbows resting on his knees, watching the girl with quiet intensity. She hadn't moved much since he brought her in. Her face was pale but no longer blue. The shaking had stopped. That was good, right? He'd done what Ma always did when one of the livestock fell ill, kept her warm, kept her breathing, and prayed silently. Now, he waited. She lay there, small and fragile beneath the thick folds of the blanket, the embroidery of her dress barely visible under the layers. Feathers and beads still clung to her hair, though some were broken or missing. Blood had dried on her left arm, where a long gash ran down from her shoulder. He'd cleaned it the best he could, but the cloth he'd used was stained through. She stirred. Eli leaned forward. Her eyes opened, again this time clearer, confused, wide alert. She tried to sit up, but her body gave out almost instantly. Eli said gently, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. You're safe. It's okay. She flinched at his voice and tried to pull the blanket tighter around herself. I won't hurt you, he added quickly. I found you by the river. You were freezing. She didn't answer. Instead, her dark eyes darted around the barn, taking in her surroundings, the tools on the walls, the loft above, the open hay doors, and the boy sitting not 5 feet away. Then she whispered something. It was soft, unfamiliar, words in her own language. Eli shook his head slightly. I don't understand. She repeated it, a little louder. Still, he didn't know the meaning. I'm Eli, he said slowly, pointing to himself. Eli. She stared at him. Then, after a long moment, she pressed a hand weakly to her chest. Naja, she said Naja. Eli repeated, careful with the syllables. Is that your name? She gave a faint nod. Eli smiled a little. Naja, you're gonna be okay. She didn't smile back, but something softened in her eyes, just a flicker. He stood and fetched a tin mug of warm water he'd heated near the stove. Gently, he helped her drink, careful not to startle her. She accepted it, slow and cautious, as if unsure whether to trust the gesture. But she drank. Afterward, she whispered something else quieter, this time, a name, a place. Eli could only shake his head again. I wish I understood you. Then he caught sight of something outside the barn window. He froze. A single feather, bright red, stuck into the top rail of the corral fence. He hadn't noticed it earlier, and he knew it wasn't there this morning. Slowly, he walked to the barn door and pushed it open a crack. The air outside was still and heavy. The moon shone silver on the snow-covered ground. The wind had gone silent, but Eli had lived out here long enough to know when something was wrong. There were horse tracks just outside the gate. His stomach turned. He backed inside and closed the door. Locked it. Someone had been watching. Maybe just one, maybe more. He glanced at Naya. She was asleep again, her breathing steadier now. But Eli could feel that there was more to this than a lost girl in the snow. Something bigger, something dangerous. He took the lantern and climbed to the loft, where he kept PA's old rifle hidden beneath the floorboards. As he laid down near the window, eyes scanning the dark horizon, he whispered to himself, "You're safe now, Naya. I don't care who's out there, they'll have to go through me first."